Hi. In this video, what we're going to call Getting Started with Your Practical Research Project, we're going to pick up where we left off in the video called the research process. If you recall in that video, we talked about three general phases of doing research: conceptualization, data collection and analysis, and dissemination. Well, in this video, we're going to focus right on that conceptualization process, the process right up front where you try to get your ideas together about what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and who you're going to do it with in terms of your research project. So this is really the most difficult part of doing research, is having a good sound plan that will enable you to have a good quality research project at the end. We're going to approach this business of thinking about conceptualization from two perspectives. So we're going to do both of these in this little video. The first is we're going to talk about the elements of conceptualization. And the second approach we're going to take is we're going to talk about the process, and we're going to do what I call the art of thinking backwards to approach the second part of this video. So in the first approach, let's talk about these elements of conceptualizing a research study. Conceptualizing a research study is a lot like juggling. You've got several balls and you've got to keep them all in the air at the same time. I've never been able to master juggling myself, but I think most of us can get the idea of conceptual juggling with ideas and not real balls. The primary components of the conceptualization process are to look at three basic elements: the issues, the sample, and the method. Those are the three balls you're going to juggle, and you're going to want to try to get a balance between those three balls as you work with them and juggle them and mold them into your research project. So let's look at issues first. That's the first element that we want to look at. Basically, this is what you want to research. This is the idea that you have, and it's critical to have this clear. It is helpful if you select a topic that you're already familiar with when you're doing the research for this course. That way you're coming into the course with some background information, some knowledge about the topic. It's not imperative that you do that, but it is helpful. If you've done some literature review on the topic as well, that can also help you out to sort of jumpstart your process, your project, and get you started in this course. But this process of the issue and defining the issue is really one of being thoughtful and critical about the issue. So you have an idea, you think about it, you read about it, you talk to people about it, which helps you further refine the idea, which then further directs your reading and thinking. So now you're being more specific about what you're looking for, which then helps you refine your idea even further, which then helps further direct your reading to be more specific. And ultimately, you've narrowed in on a fairly specific area that you're able to understand and you're able to do research on. So the more you read, the more you research, the more focused your ideas and your thinking become, and the better and the more language and vocabulary you develop to talk about your ideas, so that you're really able to articulate them in a very specific kind of way. And this is critical. This is very important to be able to conduct a good research project, is to be able to have this vocabulary and these ideas that enable you to do this. So the process here is one of going from our good idea, our observations about the world around us, down to a researchable topic. All of us have good ideas. We look around us at our workplaces, our communities, organizations that we belong to, and we ask questions like, well, why does it work that way? Well, what would happen if we changed this? Or how could that be improved? These good ideas we have all the time. The question is, do those good ideas make researchable topics, and are they the kernel of a good research project? And that's where this process of refining your ideas will help you determine that and ultimately come up with a research project that will be useful and valuable. Now, the second element of this conceptualization process is to look at the people that you want to collect the data from, your sample. One of the basic assumptions of empirical research is that you're going to collect data from people. Oftentimes, it's the people who are the starting point for your research project. There's some group of people that you know about or you have access to that you say, well, what is it about those people that's interesting? Or what is it about those people that, that I don't understand or that I would like to understand more about? And then that becomes really the starting point for helping to define your issues. So combining your idea about the issues with your ideas about the sample, you work back and forth between those two, and that really helps you refine and think about what those issues are. The issues aren't thought about in a vacuum, they're thought about in conjunction with the idea of who you're going to collect data from, your sample, and ultimately the population that that sample represents. The third element in this conceptualization process is the method. So how are you going to approach doing the research? What kinds of questions are you going to ask them? How are you going to ask those questions? What is the format? How are you going to interact with the participants? This is the way in which the data are actually collected for the research project. So are you going to give them a questionnaire? Are you going to sit down and interview them? Are you going to give them a test of some kind? Are you going to follow them around with a clipboard and write notes about what they're doing? What is the way in which you're going to actually collect the data? Now, this has implications both for the sample and for the issues. So what you have here are your methods of data collection that really will determine how you're going to interact with the sample and has implications for what the issues are. So let me give you a brief example here so you can think about how this might play out. Let's say what you're interested in is the attitudes of about taking research courses in graduate school. I know it's something near and dear to all of your hearts. So you're thinking about what are the attitudes about people taking research courses. Well, first off, it depends on who you ask. If you're going to ask different kinds of graduate students that question, there might be different kinds of answers. For example, students from overseas, international graduate students, might have very different attitudes about taking research courses than domestic students. Younger graduate students might have very different agendas, interests, values, and attitudes than, let's say, older or more experienced graduate students. What about graduate students in different majors? Would students in education versus students in the sciences versus students in the humanities or the fine arts or business have different kinds of attitudes about taking graduate research courses? So the topic of research courses and attitudes about them is influenced heavily by the sample, as you can see, and it's also influenced by the method. So if I give these graduate students, whatever group I ultimately decide on, a questionnaire, that's going to yield one kind of data and one kind of answers to my questions. But if I interview them, that's going to yield another kind of data and another kind of answers to my questions. So it actually, the method in effect reshapes or has a very important impact on the actual issue and how we conceptualize that issue. Interviewing, you don't have boundaries on what people say. So if I say, well, what do you think about taking research courses? Your answers could be all over the board. You could have people with it very positive, very negative. You could have people that would bring up topics I didn't even anticipate that they might have responded to that. Some people could talk about the relevance to their majors. Some people could talk about the relevance to their jobs. Some people could talk about the books. Some people could talk about the instructors. Some people could talk about the complex complexity of the material they have to learn. There could be a lot of different reactions to that, some of which you might have anticipated and others of which you didn't. If you have a questionnaire, it's your job as the researcher to try to anticipate all those different types of responses people might have, so that you can then judge their response on some sort of a format, like a Likert scale format of strongly disagree to strongly agree, or a checkoff format where they would select certain options, or whatever that format would be on the questionnaire. So you can see now that balancing these three, juggling these three issues, or three ideas, the issues, the sample, and the method, all interact and interplay with one another, and you really have to work back and forth amongst these in order to be able to really fully conceptualize your research project. Now, the second way I want to talk about conceptualizing research is really sounds entirely different, but it's the same thing, but just said in a different way, and maybe saying it in a different way will help you think about it, at least from another perspective. And this is what I call the art of thinking backwards. So what I want you to do is imagine for a moment that you're walking into a large lecture hall, and there's lots of people coming into the lecture hall. They're all sitting down and milling around, and they're waiting for you to give this presentation on your research. You're the world famous expert. You're going to give this lecture at this conference, and there's all these people coming into the lecture hall. The first question I want you to ask yourself is, who are the people that have come to hear you talk about your research? So if we're going to think backwards, the art of thinking backwards about doing research, let's start at the end of the research project where we disseminate the research, and let's ask, who's going to read it? Who's going to take advantage of this? Who's going to use your research in their jobs or in their lives or whatever? No research is ever done just for the sake of doing it and putting it on the shelf. Research is always done for a purpose, and there's some group of people who are going to make use of it. We're going to call this group our audience. In technical terms, we can call them the stakeholders. There's a variety of ways you can refer to them. So here we go. We're going to give our talk. We're going to give this presentation, and these people are going to be listening, whatever this group is that you've identified. Now, the next question you want to ask yourself is, what is the message that you're going to give this group of people, your audience that you've identified? Let's consider the message that you want to give to this audience that you've identified. Now, the best way, I guess, to express this is to give you an example. If the audience is, let's say, teachers of adults, that's the people that are going to benefit from your research. And let's say your research is about a teaching method, and whether or not this teaching method is better than other teaching methods for teaching adults. The message becomes, what's the viability of the teaching method that you're researching? Is it a good teaching method? Is it better than other teaching methods? Is it practical for them to consider and use? What are the benefits of this teaching method over other teaching methods? That becomes the message that you want to deliver to this audience. So you have to think about not only who the audience is, but what is the message that you're going to deliver to the audience. Let's take some other examples. If your audience is, let's say, administrators, program administrators, program planners, people that make decisions in programs, and your research is about evaluating your program, the message becomes the effectiveness of your program. So the message you want to send those people is that your program is working well, that you're doing a good job, that it benefits the organization, it benefits the learners, it benefits the community, however you're going to conceptualize the benefits of your program. Another example would be maybe your audience are policymakers, and what you're going to do is try to influence the kind of policy that they would make in a certain field. So then your message becomes what are the issues that you're researching that would influence how they conceptualize thinking about policy. Again, if your audience is the general public or some members of a professional association, you want to think about who the audience is and what the nature of the message is that you want to send to those people. Now, the next element in the process of the art of thinking backwards is to think about the data that you have to make up that message. So let's go back to our example of the administrators and trying to convince them that you have a good program. So the end audience are administrators. The message is that your program is working. Now the data that makes up that message is data about things like completion rates, success of students, how well the students are doing, how many are getting jobs, and the impact of the program on the organization or the community. So you're going to look at creating data that allows you to construct a message that will influence your audience. Now, backing up one step further in our process, we're going to look at what questions do you need to ask in order to be able to generate that data that will form your message that will convince your audience. Those questions become your method for doing your research. So are you going to give tests, questionnaires, interviews, field notes? What are you going to do to actually collect the data that you're going to put in your message? Now, when we think about the idea of collecting the data, the next step backwards in our art of thinking backwards from there is who are we going to ask those questions of? Those questions then have to be put to some group of people. Who is that group of people? Are they the students in your program? Are they members of the community? Are they employers that are employing your students after they graduate? There's a variety of ways that you can identify who the sample is. And then taking this full circle all the way back to the beginning now, we have our issues defined for us. And so now we know what it is we want to ask, who it is we're going to ask it of, what questions we're going to ask, what data that will result in, how that data will form a message to ultimately influence the audience that we want to influence. Now, not all research is a matter of persuading people to take a particular course of action or to adopt a particular point of view. Research is about discovering new information and new learning that will help us make judgments and understand things. And ultimately, you don't know how people are going to respond when you administer a questionnaire or conduct interviews. They may give you answers that surprise you. They may tell you things that you didn't anticipate. And so ultimately that message might take many different forms that you didn't anticipate. But the important thing is that you have to think backwards, starting with who's going to benefit from your research, so that you can work back to the beginning of the process, and then you can start at the beginning of the process to actually put this into implementation and lay it out and work through all the issues of doing the research. You know the old saying, if you don't know where you're going, you're likely to end up someplace else. And that's never more true than it is with research. So if you don't think through where you want your research project to go and what impact ultimately you want your research project to have, then you're not likely to be able to have the impact. Many research projects don't reach their full promise or potential because the person doing the research has been vague or not really careful about thinking through what they're doing and how they do it, and ultimately what impact they want this research to have. So it's critical to be able to think through these issues, both backwards and forwards. So in this short video, what we've done is we've talked about the issues involved with conceptualizing your research. for my money, conceptualizing the research is 90% of the work. Once you have a plan in place, the rest is just doing it, just making it happen. And this plan, coming up with a good, solid research plan, is really the basis for success in all research. A good plan won't guarantee success, but I can guarantee you a bad plan will doom any research project to failure. So take the time, think it through, work through the issues, have a good sense of what you're doing before you go out and do it, and chances are your research project will be a much better one than if you just run out and start asking people questions. Thank you.